Hello and welcome to a new session. Today we are going to be talking about guidelines to create dashboard. Those design principles and design guidelines that we can apply to be successful in when we are designing a guideline, a dashboard. Then the learning objectives are to examine those principles and techniques that are going to guide the design of population health dashboard. And if we want to think what is a dashboard, and we have introduced some visualization, storytelling, things like that. Basically, we are talking about a visual display of the most important information that is needed to achieve one or more objectives. Basically, when we're consolidating and arranging those visual information in a single screen in such a way that we can monitor that just with a brief glance. And those characteristics of a good dashboard is it has to be visual, it has to be a summarization of key information, it needs to have a goal oriented, and that insight meets an objective. Then when we ask when do we need a dashboard, basically we need to identify, A, is the user dealing with a large amount of data coming from different sources, and we need to aggregate that, and that data is going to be used to make a decisions or to track progress or something, or to track the state or condition of a dangerous condition and looking for an alarm, or we want to act when we have some insight or results. In that case, when we answer yes to any of these situations, then we say that we need a dashboard. Then for that purpose, I'm going to introduce some recipes that or some conditions, recommendations that we need to take into account when we are designing those dashboards. And the first one that we have is that definitely we need to consider the audience, who we are talking to, because it's who is that individual, what is the language that they're going to be using, what is the reading level that they have, what is the cultural context that they have, what is their background. It's not the same that we are talking to a general public that when we are talking to scientists or when we're talking to policymakers, and that's going to adjust the way that we communicate with them, and then we need to take that into account. Then we need to determine those goals and what is the data and what is the task. What is what we don't want to measure, monitor, or what we want to act on. Who is that individual that goes to that first recommendation that is going to measuring it, and where is that data coming from, and how often I'm going to be refreshing that. The other thing is we want to tell story with the data. And here are some examples of storytelling. These are the style of musics that has been derived from the origin of pop and rock and the different tendencies and the different flavors. Or this graph that we have maybe seen in the past, the Minor's graph about the Napoleon March and how the geography, and it's not clear at the time, but how that campaign just had a toll in the individuals and compared with temperature, no? Or when we have histories like this one that are talking about the daily routines of famous people and how they sleep, when they do creative work, when they do their administration of daily job, when they eat, or have some relaxations when they do exercise or other activities. Then as you see, these are visual. They have a clear message, and we can have a comparison, contrast, and a lot of activities. Then once we have defined that storytelling and the user and the goals, then we need to provide some context directly. We need to have descriptive titles. We need to focus and tell the individual what they're looking at. And do we have a contrasting metric? What is the target? Are we measuring? Are we achieving that goal? Are we getting close? Are we going away? What is happening with the activities and the interventions, and how the data is showing that as? Then we need to also provide immediate access to relevant information. And there is a rule, the 5-second rule. Then the idea is you look at the dashboard for 5 seconds, then you look away, and if you remember the specific of what is important, then you're good. That dashboard is well designed. But if not, then you need to rethink what is going on in dashboard. And then basically, if you are able to communicate to that public, you have that goal clear, you have that metric clear. The next principle is we want to have a logical layout, and usually that logical layout is like a funnel. No, you are going to start with the most relevant information, some important details, and sometimes you are going to create some general background information, and that's going to be in the bottom of that. And here we have some examples. You have the city, then you have the blocks, and in the blocks you have the incidence of cholera per house, and then you can go and see and look into the relationship where you have the wells, and that's how they were able to study that outbreak. Or here you have general data where you can see the last 24 hours cumulative cases, cumulative deaths, and this is a WHO coronavirus COVID dashboard. And we also have more detail that is basically the distribution around the world. And this is going into detail that you can zoom in, and then you can have the global situation in cases and deaths, and that's that funneling that we go from general to more specific. And here is the general background. No, then now we can have that distributed by regions in the World Health Organization. Then that's the whole idea. You start from the world, and then you are going into different levels. And the other thing is you don't need to put all the data in one page. You can do that drill down and that activity. Then here, for example, we can have weekly cases, daily cases. There are different ways of looking into the data and the frequency. And actually, this is going to tell us some other stories. Remember when we have this graph and you saw that dented graph? Basically, we didn't report tests on the weekends, and that's why you see that dented effect when you have a daily report. And maybe having weekly is enough resolution for that. Or we can also change the different ways of looking at that, daily and cumulative, and then it's going to give us different insights, because we can see a peak, but then we can see also that accumulated peak, and how we have that jump in the data. Okay, and then the other thing is, remember, there are different types of dashboards, and then we need to select the type of dashboard that we want. Then what we want to do an strategic that is in the global domain, a tactical that is going to make decisions in how to allocate resources, operational in the day-to-day activities, or analytical that we want to predict something or do some inference. And that's going to be really specific in the platform that we want to deliver. The other thing is use the right chart. Remember that we have the mapping that, and what is the task, remember, and then what is the best chart for that task that we want to use and to represent that data. And use this type of recommendation that we have presented in the past. We also want to choose the layout carefully, and this is one of those principles that is really important, because as that we read from left to right, top to bottom, usually we follow this pattern in the screen. And these are eye tracking research that it shows that usually people is going to focus on the top and in the left, and as you see, they are going to be losing interest in the exploration of the page. Then you want to have your most relevant information usually in the top and in the left in order to be able to communicate in a proper way. Also, it's really important to understand your data and use appropriate metaphors. And metaphors are those collective ideas that we have about a representation. And let's switch to this web page, for example. Then this metaphor, we have levels, then the worth line, then everything above that is good, and something higher is going to be strong, and below that line maybe it's not worth it. And here we have comparisons of the scientific evidence of popular health supplements and different conditions. Then, for example, there is a strong evidence that coffee has influence in the heart disease, And then we have more detail here. Then as you see, we have the global approach, and then we can zoom in and have more detail of that. Or we can explore also the fish oil and the omega-3 effect in preterm burn or pregnancy. Then then it says that it reduces caffeine and memory, then improves memory, and then you can see different substances. But this is a metaphor that the good is on the top, the bad is in the bottom, and we have uh, these colors that represent some direction, and also the intensity of the color is the strength of evidence, and we have that kind of metaphor that we are using there. Or let's look, for example, with vitamin D, and then the sun is a metaphor, and then we are using the clock to understand time. And then this is a clear representation of the location, and then the magnitude of the of the diameter of the circle is telling us what is good or too much, you know. And simple schematics that allow us to understand, yes, this is a fish, this is a mushroom, seems to be an egg, and those are type of a visual representation and abstractions that we have. And now we have this idea of viruses, for example. Then using metaphors and visual representations are interesting elements that we can incorporate in the visualization, not just use the traditional graphs. We can use other representation. Then another recommendation is prioritize simplicity, is the rule of minimalism. Less is better. For example, here is a really busy dashboard that is telling a lot of things about weather, bike sharing, the transit, air pollution. Then it has a lot of data, yes, but it doesn't have a specific task. Maybe if you simplify things, are going to be easy to approach. The other recommendation is round your numbers. Let's try to have finite numbers. And why? Because look at this. What is easier? What is more recognizable? It's easier to just have 640K, because that 10.35 is not giving us that much information in the magnitude of the number, is irrelevant. Or 4.3 is much more easier to interpret than 4.243 when we don't need that precision. It's just giving us a 4.0 is closer to 4 than closer to 5. But if we have the other number, we need to do more computations to really interpret that. Be careful with color. This is really important, because we want to use color in a meaningful way. We already have data and information, and that visual design should avoid excessive decoration. We don't want to actually use flourishes and things like that. The visual elements, such color, they need to be in meaningful ways. As we were looking into the metaphor exercise, maybe the intensity is going to give us the density, or traditional colors are going to tell us important things. Then in the left, we just use the color as a contrast, but in the right, we have using the color as magnitude. Then that's conveying some meaning there. But when we choose color, we need to be mindful that red and green, they often use positive and negative values. And there is a huge tendency, hey, let's use red and green. But if you're using that to represent that direction, we need to be mindful of people with that are blind to colors. And it's more common than you think. Then the other thing is we don't want to use the color as the only denominator of meaning. We want to associate colors with magnitudes, with scales and representations. And one way of doing this is combining labels and icons. And if you are dealing with colorblind individuals, the best palette that is recommended is blue and orange. When we are using a dashboard tools or visualization tools, some of them already have built-in a colorblind check-in, and you can activate that feature to try to see. And this is an example of using that blue and orange, where orange is the more orange or the darker the orange is a negative meaning, and the darker blue is a positive meaning. And this has been proved that works both for colorblind individuals and for general public that they don't have that condition. The next recommendation is that we want to use size and position to make priority clear. Then in this case, we can see size of the circles. They are going to tell us the importance, but as you see here, the elements could be sorted in some way that the magnitude is telling us, hey, what is the problematic case in this case, because we have the most cases on the top. And this is about that. No, that capability of sorting is going to help us to use the data better. The other thing, don't abuse I'm sorry, real-time data. We need really to calibrate how often we really need to have the data. It is yearly, quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily, hourly, but every single time that you pull the data is going to generate traffic. You need to re-render your images, and maybe if the phenomenon doesn't change that fast, then daily, weekly, or even monthly is going to be a good idea. When we were tracking COVID, yes, we were doing it daily, but doing that hourly is not going to give us that much information. And remember, even that weekly for COVID in the long term to track the past incidents was good, because you are not going to have data over the weekends, for example. Then you are going to be wasting resources if you are not aligned properly in the timing. The next one is we need to be consistent in the labeling. We need to be consistent in different layers. We need to be consistent on the visuals. Then the icons that we use that have meaning, we want to use them in the same way. We want to be consistent in layout. Then the people is going to try to find the same information in the same position. It's not when you change from one screen to another one, you were having your priorities on the left and now the priorities are on the right. That's going to confuse the users. And the content as well, then you don't want to just switch magically a variable or a dimension, and people is going to get distracted or lost. Remember, interactive elements, we have had discussions about that, are really important. And in this case, we are representing here tooltips, because those are going to be a specific brushing that we can do and give us more detail about the data for even for the direct information that we can capture for the image. We want also to use animation options. And one example is when we have time series, like in our working data, is really important. Having that animation is going to give us that insight, how things are changing over time, and be able to convey that multidimensional data. We want to make margins really, really distinct. You want to make your data not being mixed. Then we want to use negative space to separate concepts, and we want to use the negative space to separate observational categories or classes or filtering that we are doing. And this is really important. You don't want to have everything on top. Use that space. We also nowadays we need to optimize for multiple devices because we need to be sure that people is going to be able to access that through traditional computer screens, but most importantly we want to be sure that people can access that in mobile devices. And the different tools that we have explored, they have emulators that can allow us to explore or create layouts for different devices and screens. The other thing, consider exporting your visualization instead of using that detail. There are conditions where maybe you are not going to have the computer, but you can have a monthly report that you can have, or a weekly report that you can have in a wall, or actually it could serve also as a tool where people can be reporting directly there, and you can just then scan, take a picture, or document that. Not every single thing has to be a detail. Think about other representations, other media, depending of the context. We want to keep a geographic integrity. Yes, the data, you don't want to move things where they are not. And there are six principles, the six principles of Tofte. Then proportionality, then basically says that the representation of numbers as physical measures on the surface of the graphic itself should be directly proportional to the numerical quantities measured. That's basically, if you are representing in a location with circles or a figure, then that size of the figure should be proportional and not that allows to you to see the differences. No labeling, then we want to clear detail and thoroughly label the different graphical distortions or ambiguities, and we want to write out the explanation of the data in the graphic itself. We can have explanations in the bottom, in the caption of the data, or we can label the important event, and we want to label and highlight those things. Consistency, we have talked about that, but we want to shape variations, no design variations of the data. Okay, whatever you are showing in colors, or you are showing in sizes, or you're showing in shapes, is because they are talking about the data. It's not because you decide to change the design to present things. We want to have the right measure, especially in time series when we are displaying money or different things that change. It's better to utilize the best number and put the right units. The dimensions of data, again, it depends what you want to put. Is this a variable that is carrying information in the number, or the number is just the name of something? Then the number is not really a dimension itself, it's just a label. Then maybe we need to recode that and use a different. And in that case, for example, zip codes, they are numbers, but they are not quantities. No, they are names. Then we need to really understand that difference when we are using numbers and the context. We don't want to have data that is out of context. No. The other thing is that while labeling and embedding, take advantage of that. A lot of the tools that we have, they give us the option to embed the content into a web page or into a document or something like that. Then when we want to share or download, take advantage of that. Don't just copy and paste, because if you are embedding, you are bringing all the feature that is already on that visualization, and then it's going to be updated, and you don't need to be doing that updated. Then take advantage on recycling and reusing. Then avoid visual mistakes, and common mistakes are color that we are using to represent things that are not really important. Then, for example, look at this: temperatures, they are in a scale, and humidity, they are in a scale, but it is not clear if the darker is better or the darker is worse, and why we are using different things, and what gray means, for example, here. And all these things in green means that everything is good. And what happened with this red, no? Is that is bad? What is the denominator for that consumption of energy? Then that's be mindful of that, no? Or here maybe the colors, they have meaning because they are labeling the the tube lines in this case, or the subway. Be mindful of incorrect calculations, the wrong visuals that you want to represent time series, and maybe you're using a bar instead of a line, or having too much data. That this is a clear example that we already have discussed. And last but not least, never stop evolving. You want to ask your users, you want to ask for feedback, and you want to implement that feedback, that evaluation, and then you want to implement that. Then these are the 25 recommendations again that they are going to help you improve your designs. And here are some resources that we have used, and you can review them in the future. Thank you very much, and until new session.